Okay, so I started with cognitive behavioral therapy, which I haven't covered yet. We're going to cover it today because cognitive behavioral therapy specifically targets cognitive distortions. Cognitive distortions, again, is how your conscientious way of interpreting reality distorts and shifts when you're in fight or flight. Depression and anxiety, very specifically, are highly correlated with cognitive distortions. If you're struggling with either, you are living in a distorted state of reality and how you perceive yourself and your environment because you're in survival mode. And so the key to cognitive behavioral therapy is that you're questioning your underlying beliefs, not only about yourself, but about your environment. Ultimately, if you go back to how we talk about survival mode, remember the picture of the guy standing in front of this huge mammoth. He's facing that reality, surrendering to it, and opening himself up to the truth. Ultimately, that is exactly what cognitive behavioral therapy techniques do. The ultimate goal is to face a fear, to feel the fear, feel the biological response, to not be afraid of fear, which is where anxiety goes up. Fear of fear is anxiety. I feel the fear. Oh shit, there's the fear. I'm afraid of it. That's a real thing. So if you can face the fear, then you can ask it questions. Then you can interpret it. Then you can actually understand what's underlying it. But if you're not willing to face that fear, you're gonna have to cope, run, hide. You're going to have to do these behaviors that might be causing you even more stress, even though it might give you temporary freedom from that anxiety. So I'm going to go through these cognitive distortions again. So the homework assignment that, again, this is a big one. You are to monitor your cognitive distortions. It's not going to be with everything. You're going to find that you have no fear in certain areas, that you're more willing to face kind of outcomes in certain respects. With certain relationships, you're way more laid back. You don't take things personally, but there's some relationships that you get very nervous about, very sensitive about, might be a little more paranoid about. You might have more distortions with those. You are to find in your life where you might have distortion and monitor it. Identify which of the distortions it is. Is it all or nothing? Like, go in and debate which one is it more of than another. Because again, you're probably not just one distortion. You might have like 3 distortions for this area. I get super distorted with my husband. We've been married 26 years. This weekend, he wouldn't help me move some furniture. Oh, I catastrophized the hell out of that one. I didn't talk to him for 3 days. Called him an MRFer. Anyways, and he deserved it, I'm not gonna lie. But we all have this, and it's under certain circumstances that you're more sensitive to them. So you get to log it. What time of day? Like, if you're not aware of what they are, there's a timesheet. And we'll go over that by the end of the day or at the end of the class. So quickly, cognitive distortions are how our reality distorts when we are insecure. Chances are it's with this one. For that third hierarchy to inflame, meaning it's insecure, there has to be a core belief about your worth, about inclusion. And a core belief can be what you believe you need to be worthy of feeling good about yourself. What are those beliefs? It can be very simple, like body image. It can be intellect. It can be a religious ideology. It can be political beliefs. It can be how much money you make. What do you wear? Who freaking knows but you? So you need to identify what core beliefs you have about yourself in relation to your community that might make you a little more paranoid. Again, body image, for example. Concerned about what people think about your looks. And you might not care about other people, but if you're holding yourself to a high standard, you're going to feel like crap even when no one cares, right? So those are typically attached to worth and if you're worthy of inclusion. So that requires that you have an assessment then. So you have a core belief. There is an assessment of if you're making it, if someone else is doing it, if they're not doing it, what those expectations are. So the assessment of the expectations to the reality, then you're gonna have thoughts about it. Oftentimes with distortions, they're negative thoughts. If they're personal, like I struggled at that test, I suck as a human being, I don't look good, I'm not going out. And then that affects how you feel, right? So that biologically changes your brain chemistry. Because you're in fight or flight, you're wanting to shrink, you're wanting to hide, or you're wanting to fight. That's what I did with my husband this weekend. Or you wanna freeze, isolate, right? That's affecting your behaviors. Again, you have to have a core belief about what secures the third hierarchy of need. This is a requirement for you to have an assessment. And then thoughts and feelings, that's where your cognitive distortions come in, because you're interpreting that reality or trying to jump to conclusions about that reality. And then you change your behavior. So those behaviors could be smoking, porn, they could be pacing, shopping, could be picking at your face because you have zits. It could be anything. It could be drinking, alcohol, drug use. This doesn't happen without this whole thing. This is how it works. So what they found is people that address this is the heart of the problem, that this whole thing changes. Unfortunately, modern medicine goes, well, here's the problem. This is an addiction. We need to cut that out. They don't address that. This is why prescribed medication can only do so much, right? But when you can get major transformation of way you perceive your reality, even if it is traumatic, a trauma core belief. I had a client who was coming to me for binge eating behavior. She was molested by her grandfather from the age of about 4 until 12, and then he discarded her because she wasn't a child anymore. And that changed her sense of worth because she thought there was something about her that would attract that. Now you're all adults. Is there something about a 4-year-old that would make her lure a man in? Would he have done that to anybody who was an easy target? Of course, this had everything to do with him, but her core belief about herself was that my body is a risk. My body is not my friend, and I'm disgusting. And that actually didn't happen for her until she was later in age. Then she started to be disgusted. She wasn't disgusted as a child. She didn't know to shame anything. So the beliefs also changed as she got older. So core beliefs about that alone. So our discussion around this had nothing to do with you. She'd never heard that before. Decades of therapy, never heard. This has nothing to do with you. That whole experience had nothing to do with you. Changed her whole paradigm. It wasn't, you didn't deserve that. No. That does nothing. That puts her in a victim position, makes her feel sorry for herself. That's not going to help this whole behavior problem, right? That experience had nothing to do with you. It had everything to do with that person. And what do you think happened to him that would put him in that position? Do you think that he was inherently born to be that way, or was he conditioned? So flipping her view to be compassionate to her grandfather, not enabling, but compassionate around how messed up this guy was, and that he would have probably done this to anybody. It completely took her sense of worth and completely disassociated it from that core belief. It was instantaneous transformation. She never binged ate again. I'm not kidding. We worked together for about 6 months. She never needed to binge eat because we took away the underlying reason for the behaviors. Now, she was told she's addicted to food. How's that going to help the situation? How is telling someone they're addicted to food going to help this? It doesn't. In fact, it actually doesn't work. The whole disease model is not working very well at all. Moving on. Okay, all or nothing thinking. It's either perfect or it's not. Okay, we're going to go through this quickly. So you're going to need to spend some time really going through this. I decided not to assign you to write all these out and turn them in, because I just don't think that's helpful. But you need to get to know these, and which ones in particular you default to. So that is more important to me than you writing this out in paragraphs and sending me an assignment. So you don't have this assignment like the last 2 semesters have. Which one is you? Get to know this one. Overgeneralizing, basically defining whole groups of people, defining yourself, just generalizing things as either all of them do this always happens, stuff like that. Filtering, that's bias. I definitely have this. Definitely. I have certain beliefs about certain beliefs, and you're probably not going to convince me otherwise. Confirmation bias, only looking at what confirms your belief set. And that, what does this have to do with? I mentioned this on Monday. Why would you only want to seek your beliefs and confirm your beliefs? What does that serve? Yes, which is what? What is it about that? I know you answer, you put yourself in this position. Narcissism is proving you're superior. That would be narcissistic, right? Grandiose, narcissistic tendencies. Your need to be superior, which means you're trying to secure this third hierarchy need with core beliefs about your superiority and what you think. And chances are you aren't willing to hear anything that conflicts, even if it's even if it hurts yourself and others. This is like digging your feet in, and like war, if you think about it this way, and even though you know you're losing, still continuing to fight, even though it doesn't really improve anything or make anything better. Discounting the positives, getting a compliment and immediately not agreeing or believing. This is like a projection of your own insecurity onto others, as if they don't believe their own compliment. Mind reading, this is like jumping to conclusion, assuming you know what people think. Assuming you again, let's just say you're having some anxiety because you feel inadequate socially, you don't have a sense of self, and you don't feel like you're complying to your ideals. And you jump to the conclusion or mind read that you think everybody's looking at you. Everybody's noticing that your shoes aren't cool, you know, or I don't know, seeing a stranger with an unpleasant look and just assuming that they're judging you. Well, you're judging yourself, and you're just projecting that onto someone else as if they're doing it, as if they have the same beliefs. Fortune telling, kind of the same thing, another form of jumping to conclusions. Okay, I'll go through this. Maximizing, minimizing. This is like, again, think of distortion. I'm gonna make things bigger than they really are, kind of like I did with my husband about him not helping me. Or I'm gonna minimize something because I don't want to change that. You could also see that as bias, right? Emotional reasoning, assume because you feel it, that it's true. Not questioning that your feelings might not actually be, even though the feelings are real, you're experiencing the feeling, but what if it's based on not a really good assessment? Maybe your beliefs are distorting the assessment, maybe your reality isn't, it's all jumbled up. And then you're assuming because you have the feeling like so-and-so, I'm jealous, so therefore they must be cheating on me. Should statements, again, should statements have everything to do with the ideal. I should be this, I should do that. Usually it's an inflated idea, meaning it's a perfectionistic idea or concept that you should be. And that is assuming that when you say I should be this or they should do that, it really comes down to core beliefs about what would make your third hierarchy of need fulfilled. This is also stemming from something kind of narcissistic, right? Holding yourself to these higher standards that in reality you might not be able to achieve, or others. It might be unrealistic, meaning that you'd have to be in a vacuum, isolated from any hardship. So these should statements typically come from some narcissistic or perfectionistic ideology. And if you're holding other people to it, as if you're, pretty righteous, you're going to be quite disappointed, disgusted, have maybe anger or resentment for others. Like my husband, he should have helped me this weekend, but he watched football. I need to get over it. Labeling yourself. So labels are really common, right? You're an idiot, they're an idiot, I'm a total loser. Giving yourself a basic, again, conclusion. Often these conclusions, when you're labeling, again, give something an identity, or it's like placing them in a hierarchy, which can give you a sense of safety, even though it actually is really miserable. You might be in misery, but by labeling, you're essentially placing yourself potentially above others. If you're labeling yourself, you're placing yourself below. So it's confirming your beliefs about where you are in your belonging. Anybody have questions? Okay, I'm sorry, I gotta go through this so fast, but I wanna make sure if you guys have questions, you're asking it before we start getting into the cognitive distortion practice. Taking everything personal, right? Again, what that is it's like seeking out information that would confirm whether you are secure in that third hierarchy of need or if you are not. So personalizing everything can really actually functions as a way to have clarity around where you're positioned. It's also very miserable because you're inflamed. You're actually in a state of insecurity. All of these distortions don't come from a place of feeling great. They come from a place of feeling like shit, right? Because you're insecure with your worth and your value to your society. So all of these impact how you think. Okay. And I'm gonna skip this one. Oh, control fallacy. I'm gonna try to paraphrase this one. This is like thinking, it's like hyper individualization. So if I were to be really short with individualization, it would be if you end up with type 2 diabetes, it's because you're lazy, it's because you don't want to work hard enough. It's because it's your fault. You have everything, it's all you. Not taking into account context, right? That this person might be in poverty, they don't have access, they can't afford proper food, they don't even get health care because it's too expensive. They're in constant fight or flight because they're struggling with these two. They're not just dealing with stigma, because someone who's in poverty is constantly stigmatized. I have a few followers living in California who literally videotape homeless people and shame them and post this shit. I don't know why I still follow it. It's because one of them is a client of mine and I can't say anything, but they're just shaming people who they have no idea what their struggle is, why they're addicted, why they're homeless, why they're comfortable in the position they're in. They're clueless, but they're just shaming and degrading as if that's a choice that's so easily fixed, not taking into account context. So this would be control fallacy. Very much a byproduct of a narcissistic culture. Pick yourself up by your bootstraps, people. Fallacy of fairness as well. We didn't go into this one. Life is supposed to be fair, right? So if I work hard, I should get the reward. And if I don't get the reward, you're set up to feel like shit. So you could have a lot of negative feelings, constantly grading and valuing the fairness of reality, right? A person who judges every experience by its perceived fairness has fallen into this fallacy and will likely feel anger, resentment, hopelessness, victimized for others when they inevitably encounter a situation that is not fair. Fallacy of change, expecting others to change when given enough pressure or prodding. like me and my husband. Okay, I'll move on. We all do it. It's just to what degree, what seriousness we take ourselves, right? I'm still human. And I'm aware of where I'm having this problem, right? Versus taking myself so serious. Fallacy of change often is when you're in a codependent relationship, right? My happiness, my security relies on you behaving the way I need you to behave so that I'm comfortable, right? So this is a great picture depicting this. You need to do what I'm telling you to do, and if this person doesn't, it can feel that's like narcissistic supply that we've talked about. That person is supplying you some sense of value that really isn't their job; it's yours. You know, if I could just encourage the so-and-so to stop doing the things that irritate me, we'll be a better relationship. I'll be a happier person. Be aware of you're doing this. Always being right. This is so me. You position in your mind to be right, and even when there is evidence you're wrong. Now that's not. I have no problem with me being right, but when you're wrong, it really behooves you to just have the humility to accept that you're wrong. What that does, again, that's like being malleable. Allowing yourself to be wrong or recognizing you might be wrong under someone else's viewpoint allows you to have connection, allows you to have a relationship. If you always have to be right, you're going to be positioning yourself in most conversations to one up, to control. So you really can't have an even relationship. And if you're wrong and that's unacceptable, again, this would be narcissistic, right? Arguing over political views far beyond the point where reasonable individuals would conclude that they should agree to disagree. Okay. Hard work, okay, heaven's fallacy. See, some of these kind of overlap. Beliefs that your hard work, sacrifice, and struggles will result in a reward, and that is not the case for most everybody all the time, actually, unless you're born into it. And these rewards, you know, you can distort what you think the reward is, right? Like when I get all A's, I will feel that I have proven myself. Well, once you get all A's, you still haven't really fulfilled your third hierarchy of needs. So really, it doesn't really give you any gratification. The fantasy did. So again, that's like the heavens reward fountain. It's like chasing a mirage, if you think about it that way. That's what this is. It's a mirage. You can work and work and work and work. Chances are, even if you get the reward, if you were doing it to secure this, it was conditional, which means that reward is for a very short fleeting period of time. It's not based on your inherent born natural worth. It was unnaturally worked for, which is awesome, but you have to keep on unnaturally working if that's what you're basing it on. So that's like the rat on the rat wheel that never stops, chasing the mirage. There could be a whole book written on just that alone. Okay, so we're going to get into cognitive behavioral therapy. This is Walter Beck, Dr. Beck. He's the one that started studying this in the 1970s. And the whole point of cognitive behavioral therapy is to take those distortions, which create all of this cascade into fight, flight, and the behavior, and to stop it, to reverse it. Chances are you're not getting chased by the bear. You aren't going to get shunned into the wilderness. You're not. And even if you, let's say, end up homeless and alone, there is access to food, there's access to shelter if you really wanted it. Meaning there's programs in place. You just have to find it and want it. And hopefully it's adequate. Okay, Aaron Beck, treat depression, anxiety. It is more effective than, and this is well known, 20 plus years that they've known this. This has been going on and studied for 40 plus years. The hard thing is that it's moving parts with some people, right? Getting to the actual core beliefs is more difficult than you would expect. For example, the client who was molested, she didn't want to tell me that, and didn't think it was important with our work. But I was kind of asking her questions and she was like, well, maybe this, and I was like, oh, there's a core belief about who you are. You can't not have being molested and it not affect you. Okay. Okay, this meta-analysis done in 1989. This is superior to all other forms of psychotherapy and treatment of depression. Over 40 years of research with CBT has shown that this approach is successful at reducing symptoms and relapse rate in a variety of psychiatric disorders, to include borderline personality disorders, major things. Borderline is, narcissistic tendency is considered borderline. Eating disorders are considered borderline. PTSD, complex PTSD is considered kind of inside that cluster of diagnoses, which change, right? As we get more information, it changes. Okay, so let's learn about cognitive behavioral therapy.
Cognitive behavioral therapy is based on the idea that certain situations trigger false core beliefs that negatively impact our thoughts, emotions, behavior, and physical reactions. Once we learn how to identify what situations bring upon such destructive thoughts, we can practice developing new interpretations that will then change our pattern of reaction. The therapy is widely used to help people with phobias, depression, anxieties, or addictions. To show how it works, let's look at Lily, a teenage girl who hates going to school due to her fear of being judged and humiliated. In her first session, the therapist tries to build trust and explains how CBT functions. Since the better Lily understands the process, the more likely it is that the therapy is effective. The therapist also illustrates how our brain, in specific situations, follows a fixed path of reason, which gets stronger after years of having the same thought process. Many of our destructive behaviors are based on false core beliefs, thoughts that objectively don't make sense. We acquired these false beliefs when we were too young to interpret others correctly. Throughout the therapy, Lily will try to unlearn these false beliefs and create new mental pathways that will replace the false beliefs she holds of herself with more realistic thoughts. Once Lily understands the process, the counselor begins to ask questions following the Socratic method, a form of argumentative conversation that stimulates critical thinking to draw out false ideas and underlying assumptions. Would you like to tell me why you're here today? Starts the therapist. Because I think I'm not normal, Lily responds. You appear perfectly normal to me. Can you be more specific? I think I'm afraid of people. So you are afraid of me? No. Do you feel socially insecure? I'm not sure what you mean. Tell me how you feel about school. I'm scared of going because they think I'm stupid. Throughout the interview, the counselor takes notes of Lily's answers and identifies the signs of social anxiety based on a false core belief. Lily believes she is stupid. For a homework, Lily should practice introspection. The goal? To find out which situations trigger her negative thoughts. She gets a learning journal to keep records of all triggers and other observations, such as self-talk or interpretations of particular events and people. During the following week, Lily becomes more aware of her thoughts and the physical reactions they trigger. By paying attention to her feelings, she identifies a specific pattern which occurs every time during math class. The moment her teacher begins to ask questions, her heart starts racing and her palms get sweaty. She worries about having to answer the question, about making a mistake, about looking dumb in front of all the others. In her second session, Lily shares her observations and the therapist helps her realize that her cognitive behavioral patterns are false. First, her math grades are great, so she should feel anything but stupid. Second, she explains that there are always more interpretations to the same thing. What to her may look like her stupid face, to others she may just look unhappy about having to answer. The reason she is afraid of what people think is a form of social anxiety, a completely irrational cognitive behavioral response. As the sessions continue, the therapist suggests 3 practical strategies. Through journaling, Lily records her negative beliefs and reformulates them into positive ones she can replace them with. Constructive self-talk helps her to replace a critical voice with a positive one. And she starts exposure exercises, which means Lily deliberately puts herself in situations where she becomes the center of attention. Along the way, the 2 set goals that are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-based. SMART goals give her control over how she progresses, thus helping her gain confidence in herself. Over time and with a lot of practice, her brain builds new neural pathways that lead to different, more neutral reactions to the same old triggers. And one day, Lily may even enjoy the thrill of speaking in front of her class. Her interpretation of the situation is more realistic and more aligned with those of the others. CBT was initially developed in 1964 by Aaron Temkin Beck. Beck hypothesized that people's feelings are determined by the way they interpret situations, rather than the situations per se. About depression, he once said, if our thinking is bogged down by distorted symbolic meanings, illogical reasoning, and erroneous interpretations, we become, in truth, blind and deaf.
That was kind of a recap of what I was saying, right? In a very simplified.
This and all other sports videos are licensed under Creed.
So let's go quickly through this. I actually think I might go to the next, we're gonna go to the next slide. So this is the finish of the class discussion 10. We're gonna go to the ones where I started last time. And we're gonna go right to this.
I started out at the University of Pennsylvania Medical School. I finished my residency.
This is David
and I
Burns.
did a
He's also one of
research
the most
fellowship on
important
depression.
researchers
I
on
was always curious,
CBT.
what makes us depressed? Why do we fall into these black holes? What's the cause of it? What can we do to turn these moods around? And I started out like many young psychiatrists. This is what you call a biological psychiatrist. I was doing research on brain chemistry, this idea of depression and anxiety due to some kind of chemical imbalance in the brain. I was treating patients with antidepressants and other medications. There were only two problems from my point of view. The first is our own research. The research we did didn't seem to confirm that depression or anxiety were actually due to a chemical imbalance in the brain. In fact, our research indicated that this probably is not the cause of depression and anxiety. In addition, I was giving out antidepressants by the bucketful to patients. I had hundreds of patients, and while a few of them were being helped, most of them were not. They were going on week after week, saying, I want to die, I feel worthless. And I said, gosh, there's got to be a better way. If the pills had worked, I would have been perfectly happy. And I thought maybe there's some type of psychotherapy I could combine with the medications, because I wanted people to be able to wake up and say, it's great to be alive, and I have joy, I'm full of love, I'm full of life, and I was rarely seeing that. And I tried different kinds of psychotherapy, they didn't seem to work. And then a colleague said, there's something new fellow here at Penn is developing, Aaron Beck, and he calls it cognitive therapy, and it's kind of simple in its theory. And maybe you could try this out with some of your patients. A cognition is a thought. It's just a fancy word for a thought. And there's three basic ideas behind cognitive therapy. The first is that our thoughts create all of our moods. And that when you're depressed and anxious, you're giving yourself negative messages. You're blaming yourself. You're telling yourself something terrible is going to happen. Now, this idea is not new. It goes back to the Greek philosopher Epictetus. Nearly 2,000 years ago, he said people are disturbed not by things, in other words, not by the events of our life, but by the views we take of them. That we create all of our emotions, positive and negative, at every moment of every day through our interpretations of what's going on. And it goes back even before Epictetus to the Buddha, who was saying the same thing 2,500 years ago. Well, the second idea is that when you're depressed and anxious, those negative thoughts, I'm no good, I'm a loser, what's wrong with me, I shouldn't have screwed up, I should be better than I am. Those thoughts are not realistic thoughts. They're distorted. That depression and anxiety are the world's oldest cause, and that there's 10 distortions that you always see in the negative thoughts of individuals who are depressed and anxious, like all or nothing thinking. If I'm not a great success today, I'll be a total failure. Shades of gray don't exist, or overgeneralization, seeing a negative event as a never-ending pattern of defeat, or should statements, or self-blame. And the third idea was that you could train people to change the way they think, and then suddenly change the way they feel. Well, I heard that theory, and I said, that sounds like so much bullshit. I know my patients have negative thoughts. That's certainly the case, but you can't help serious suicidal depression with some kind of power of positive thinking. And I told a colleague this, he says, well, David, why don't you go to his next weekly seminar, and as part of your research, try this with a few of your toughest patients, and then you can prove to yourself that it doesn't work. And I thought, that's a great idea. I think I'll check it out. Well, the first patient I tried it out was a woman referred from the intensive care unit of the University Hospital. She had made a nearly successful suicide attempt. An elderly Latvian immigrant, and they referred her to me for follow-up. And I said, Martha, there's this new form of therapy. I'm doing some investigating, and would it be okay if I present your case at this weekly seminar? And then I could tell you what they say, and maybe we could find some new techniques. And she was fine with that. She gave me permission. So I presented her case to Dr. Beck and said, but how would you use this cognitive therapy with someone who's suicidal? And he said, well, our thoughts create all of our emotions. So just ask her, what were you telling yourself the moment you tried to commit suicide? So I went back to her and I said, well, she said, what'd you find out in the seminar? I said, well, I'm supposed to ask you what you were telling yourself the moment you attempted suicide. What were your negative thoughts? And she said, oh, I was telling myself that I'm a worthless human being because I've never accomplished anything meaningful or significant in my life. And she said, now what am I supposed to do about that? And I said, I'm not sure. You have to wait a week. Go back and ask at the seminar. So I went back and said, hey, here's what I found out. What should I do? And Dr. Beck said, well, one technique we use is called examine the evidence to see if what you're telling yourself is true or not. Ask her to make a list of several things she has accomplished. I thought, yeah, that makes sense. So I went back and I said, she said, what did you find out at the seminar? I said, you're supposed to make a list of several things you have accomplished. She said, well, that's just the problem. I can't think of anything. And I don't know, maybe some of you folks felt that way sometimes, look back on your life and say, what have I done that was really meaningful, really significant? What did my life really amount to? So I said, well, why don't you take it as a homework assignment? Maybe you can think of something. Well, the next week, I forgot I gave her the homework assignment. I did my usual non-specific schmoozing and how are you feeling? And you need a refill on the antidepressant and this type of thing. And halfway through the session, she said, well, aren't you going to ask me about my homework? I said, oh, I forgot. Did you come up with anything? And she handed me a list of about 7 or 8 things that she had accomplished during her life. And the first one, she said, I overlooked the fact that I smuggled my children out of Nazi Germany. My husband died in the concentration camps. All of our relatives died in the concentration camps, but I got the children out and we made it to America. And I worked scrubbing floors and cleaning people's houses to keep food on the table and to keep a roof over our head. And this week, my son just graduated first in his class from the Harvard Business School. So I thought, well, maybe that's an accomplishment. And then she said, and I forgot that I speak 5 languages fluently. And I'm a gourmet chef, and she had all these amazing things. And I said, Martha, how do you reconcile this with your claim that you're a worthless human being who's never accomplished anything meaningful? And she said, Dr. Burns, it doesn't compute. It doesn't make any sense. I don't know how I could have been thinking that. And I said, how are you feeling now? She said, I'm feeling a lot better. She said, do you have any more techniques? I said, no, that's the only one I've learned so far. You have to wait till next week. I'll learn another technique. And so that's how it began to go. And I began to see patient after patient that I've been stuck with. Some patients who said they've been depressed, had failed therapy for more than 50 years. Some who said they never had one moment of happiness in their entire life, suddenly experienced joy and self-esteem. And I said, this is the thing I want to commit my life to. I had just received a grant from the government, a 5-year grant to develop a brain chemistry research laboratory at the medical school. And I sent the money back. I said, I don't want to spend my life doing research on a theory that's not going to bear fruit. This is what I want to do. And then the research began to come in. First, a pilot study at Penn that showed that this new form of therapy was as effective, if not more effective, than the best antidepressant drugs. And then study after study has come in, and now it's become the most researched form of psychotherapy in history. We all got excited, and Dr. Beck said, David, would you like to co-author the manual that we're writing for therapists so people can learn how to do this new form of?
You can watch the rest of that on your own, but Burns has several books, so does Beck, and Beck's daughter has several books. If this is something you're really interested, whether you're going to be in there as a therapist or in therapy, highly recommend their books. They're very specific, much easier than me rambling off as fast as I can, trying to get as much information. But this is these videos are in the discussion in the actual slides, and you can find a lot. So moving forward. So just remember cognitive distortions, how fight or flight, how survival mode, how insecurity, more specific, well, insecurity in any of these 3 areas is going to create distortions, and how you perceive food, how you perceive shelter. But more than anything, we're struggling probably with this one and how you relate to people. So it is a fight or flight response. So the first thing you need to know is these distortions are nothing to feel bad about. You're not a bad person. All people function with these distortions to 1 degree or less on some spectrum, depending on how insecure those needs are. Just knowing that alone is important, because if you're feeling guilty about the way you're processing, chances are you are not going to want to face it. Because guilt means that you suck because of it. So why would you want to face it? So the first thing with understanding this is to allow yourself to actually accept that these are natural. They definitely make your life miserable, and any relationship you have probably has some misery with it too. So it would benefit you to understand why it's there and what is triggering it. This is kind of how life feels like when you are in fight or flight, literally. Okay, we don't need to cover that. Already did that. You feel stupid, so you focus on, okay, we already talked about that the other day. Okay, so let's practice. I'd like to practice because you're going to need to do this for this assignment. So I want to take the last half an hour and kind of go through scenarios with you so you can get a sense of, oh, this isn't as hard. It's really not as hard. It's gonna take you getting a notebook, writing stuff down, taking note. I will know if you just jot shit down. I'm gonna know. Okay, so do not wait and fake it till the end, because I'll know it. Do an honest job. This whole point of this course, as we move out of mental health, this is kind of the end of our mental health as part of this. The whole point is that it affects you in a positive way, that it actually translates into your life. It's not just supposed to be, I have a knowledge of cognitive behavioral therapy. Can you actually do some of this stuff? Even if you're not struggling that, can you try it? Because if you have some, like exercise, if I suggest to you, okay, you guys are gonna do a yoga video, which you're gonna do meditation practices. There's other things I want you to do. Well, in this case, this actually could be something that you can take forward when you struggle later in your life, whether you're struggling now or later. It's a technique that's super effective that you can practice. So to me, this is like assigning you a fitness thing. This is equally as important. So I want you to think of a hardship you've been through as a child that formed the way you perceive yourself today. Think about it. So for me, I had a teacher. Did I tell you about the teacher that pulled my hair? Okay. I was in 2nd grade. I remember it so clearly. Well, first of all, my father at the time, we were living in Alaska at a base. We were super poor. There's 10 kids. I'm number 9 of 10 children. We're all really close in age. Like my mom had 10 of us in like 12 and a half years. Like bam, 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 bam. And not only that, but we were pretty poor. We took on some natives to live with us as exchange. So Eskimos can come live with you is an exchange program so that they can, come into the city and get high school and get like prom, and they can get experience with the American culture, right? So we had rooms that were partitioned with sheets, and we couldn't afford milk, so we were drinking powdered milk. And I actually remember that when my parents shifted to that. We couldn't afford fruit, so we had vitamin C tablets that we were taking in. I was happy. At the time, I was like 3, 4. I thought it was fan-freaking-tastic. Well, my father's having fits of rage, and I see him throwing my siblings downstairs. I'm seeing him lose his mind. I don't know if any of you know someone who's had PTSD. When that shit turns on, it's really difficult. And he didn't necessarily know what was going on. There was nothing to help him. This was maybe 10 years after Vietnam. So I remember one time him coming home, picking me up, shoving me against the wall. I had a button break. But that was my only memory. But at the time, I was now in 2nd grade, and I'm starting to show signs of ADHD, which is actually anxiety. from this. I didn't know that. And I play with my hair. I was playing with my hair, this long, thick ass hair, and I would play with it because I wasn't understanding what was going on in the classroom. And I must have annoyed the teacher because she came up to me and pulled my braid, yanked on it, and told me to pay attention. I will never forget that. Ever. Since then, I've wanted to get the approval of instructors forever. And I'm not all that smart. I struggled. I didn't read until 4th grade, and I had to have assistance because I was so anxious in classrooms. I was full of anxiety because I felt so stupid. I felt dumb. I was worried. That was just one childhood experience I had. There's something that you have, it might not be that crazy, but it could be you watching your parents fight. It could be you being criticized by some group of people in junior high that really impacted how you felt about your worth. Again, comes back down to this. So you're gonna wanna start this with those core beliefs about your worth, your 3rd hierarchy of need, where you might be overcompensating. So I find it interesting in that video where he starts talking about this client who had attempted suicide, and then she said she didn't have any accomplishments. Clearly she was compensating. She was highly accomplished and didn't feel accomplished. Remember, that's the mirage that I was telling you about. And she couldn't see that until she stopped and actually took record of her accomplishments to then question the evidence. Okay. Something to add to that. What didn't you know as a child about that situation? So now we're questioning the evidence, right? So for me, I didn't know that I was dealing with real stress as a child, real stress around the uncertainties of home, strangers in my home, because we had taken in these natives, not having enough food, taking vitamin C tablets. I didn't have anything to understand what was happening, right? We know later, right? I know later my dad had PTSD and it was not good. And there was no treatment for him, right? There's no treatment. So I know that now. So being able to go back in your mind to give it context can be very healing. For example, like the client I had who was molested as a teenager, or excuse me, as a child until she turned into a teenager. And then there was more because then he abandoned her and she felt worthless there too, physically. Anyways, we had to recontextualize the experience. Was it really about you? Was there something specific about you that brought that up in that man? No, he was having those problems and he would have taken advantage of that. So recontextualizing that. What would you have gone back and said, there must be something wrong with you, knowing what you know now? Well, no. So reframing, not saying that shouldn't have happened to you, because you can't go back and do that. That won't work. Going back to say something should not have happened is a victim position. It doesn't work. It won't go anywhere. You're going to stay in a loop. So you got to go back and recontextualize it as if you don't have the option of going back. If I didn't have the option of changing that teacher's response to me playing with my hair, I would have probably thought she might have been having a really bad day and probably shouldn't be teaching young children. There's a story behind why she would feel comfortable doing that. Plus, there's a generational difference. Slapping hands, putting the dunce cap on, that was normal. It was a normal thing. To use violence, authoritarian style of parenting, that was normal. So for me though, I didn't understand why, right? So recontextualizing from your current awareness is really healing. That can change your brain's biology because you're retelling the story from a different position. Chances are your story about the way your mom was, or the way your dad was, or what your sister did, or what your brother did, or what your friends did, was from the position of you as a child that was naive. You're not dumb, you were just naive, you didn't understand it. you get older, your brain forms, you have more context, you have more knowledge to be able to go, oh, well, this, I know my mom was struggling with an addiction. Did that have anything to do with you? No. My dad had PTSD. What did that have to do with me? Nothing. Had nothing to do with any of us. Had everything to do with what how he dealt with war and having to kill people, having to watch people get killed, right? How your mind deals with that you have to recontextualize it. Core beliefs about one's worth and one's capacity to handle hardship usually stem from the child's perspective. Talk to the child from the place you wish, what would you have liked to have known? Can you insert knowledge into the perspective? Of course, you can't go back and make a child like highly intelligent like an adult, but you can change the framework of how you recall with new information. Anybody have questions about that? It's kind of a big deal. Insert new information to your memory. Give it more information. Maybe not trust the child's perspective that doesn't know how hard it is to be a parent, right? Like right now, how many of you have children? How hard is it to be a parent? Right. Like before you had kids, you were probably clueless. It kind of takes having them to go bing for that brain to change. Chances are you're being super critical of your parents because you're ignorant and naive to what that's like. Does not mean your parents aren't douchey at times, that my dad didn't beat the living shit out of my older siblings more so than us. We got super controlled with authoritarian styles and belief systems. So I got a totally different way of parenting than my older siblings did. Now I have context. I totally understand why they raised me this way. It made them feel safe. It was actually loving for them to be authoritarian, to threaten with getting lickings with the belt. That's authoritarian style of parenting. That would make my dad feel safe. Doesn't mean it was right, it just means that there's a reason for why. So going back with your adult awareness to rethink how and what you needed to hear, and then hear it, and update your software. So I usually call this updating software, right? You're gonna hear me say this multiple times. You need to update your software because your software was probably based when that trauma or experience happened that formed maybe a core belief about your worth. When you were a child with no perspective around what was going on in the real world. You need to update the software to your current knowledge. And that changes the story, which changes biology, which changes behavior. Okay, so this is important because you might internally be thinking, I'm not doing that. My mom is a total jerk. Why would I want to make her look better than she is? This is so not uncommon. Well, that means you're in the right, which means you're inflating yourself to be better than you think you are and minimizing that person. So you are actually in fight or flight and you're going to perpetuate fight or flight. So unless you can go in and recontextualize, chances are you're getting off on your position to it. You might like the position because it's given you a sense of reason to be better, to do more. But that's a fight response. So how long can you handle that? How disconnected can you be from reality? Gotta move on. So what if you're wrong in these assumptions? So one of the techniques, there's many techniques, but the first thing is to face the feelings, to actually experience the feelings. So if there's any notes, the first thing you need to do is experience the actual feelings. How many of you can recall what nausea feels like? How does nausea feel, right? Throaty, your head hurts, you can't do anything, you can't pay attention, eyes need to be shut, right? That's a feeling you're experiencing. You are feeling nauseous. Fear is also biological. It is just a feeling. It is just a feeling. What does fear feel like? So one technique is called acceptance and commitment therapy. That's also a cognitive behavioral therapy. Acceptance and commitment. The first thing is to feel and accept the feelings. You have to accept the grief, accept the loss, accept the pain. Now, if you aren't willing to accept it, you're going to feel sorry for yourself. You're going to go into victimhood. You're going to pity yourself. That's not acceptance. Accept the feeling. What does fear feel like? And remove the judgment. Remove the judgment so that you can actually accept what it is and you can understand. How many of you have felt fear? Right. Let yourself feel it. It's just a feeling. So separating the judgment can actually make it actually less. Okay, so we're gonna go through this really quick.
Whenever you have a thought, your brain releases chemicals. Whenever you have an angry thought, a hopeless thought, a helpless thought, a critical thought, your brain releases chemicals that make you feel that. And it happens immediately. Your hands get colder, they start to sweat, your muscles get tense, your breathing becomes more erratic. The opposite is true. Whenever you have a happy thought, a hopeful thought, a loving thought, a grateful thought, an appreciation thought, a kind thought, your brain releases a completely different set of chemicals that warm your hands, dry your hands, relax your muscles, cause your breathing to be healthier. And so the exercise is super simple, but you have to do it 100 times. Whenever you feel sad or mad or nervous or out of control, write down what you're thinking.
Yeah.
And then ask yourself, is it true? But basically write down the thought. All my colleagues hate me. And then
I gotta pause this. The only way for that to happen is you have to feel the feeling. So many people have the feeling and they try to escape it. They immediately do something, they isolate. They don't necessarily sit and ask the feeling questions. So one, feel the feelings. Two, ask it questions. Why are you here? What is this about? And the answer will come up. It doesn't come up here. It's a feel, emotion feel. Okay. So then he's saying, write it down.
Is it true? No. 10,000 colleagues refer patients to me, so it's not true. Is it absolutely true? If one is no, two is automatically no. Three is, how do I feel when I have the thought, oh, my colleagues hate me? I feel lonely.
Yeah.
And I feel sad. And I feel angry. And I feel like I'm living in a dynamo. Question four is, who would you be or how would you feel if you didn't have the thought? Well, I feel happy and driven and motivated. So thoughts drive feelings. Feelings drive behavior. And behaviors drive outcome. You want to be successful, you have to get your thoughts.
Amen.
And what I love is question number 5. Is take the original thought, oh my God, and turn it to the opposite. Now, not the narcissistic opposite, all my colleagues love me, that might be true. But not all of my colleagues hate me. And I'm like, well, it's totally true. And when you do those 5 questions, the negative thoughts disappear. But when you don't challenge them, they expand.
Oh, yeah.
So writing them down and questioning them helps to kill them, provides protein for the antidote. And letting them run around in your head provides the gaslight for anxiety and depression. Thoughts are automatic. They come from all sorts of places. Many of them are written in your genes. When trauma happened to your great-grandfather, that got written in your genetic code. Now, when good things happen, that gets written into your genetic code as well. And thoughts come from what your parents said to you, what your siblings said to you, what your classmates, the ones who liked you and the ones who didn't like you. It comes from the news, it comes from music. Thoughts come from all sorts of places, and they lie. They lie a lot.
Okay. So questioning those automatic thoughts, because when they come up, the feelings arise and you just don't even question them. So allowing your feelings to happen, allowing the thoughts to come up, asking the questions will allow you then to examine the evidence. Okay, so this is where I was going. think of it as a court situation. My oldest daughter, Chloe, she's 22, oftentimes she is called in a panic, and I will quickly go through like, okay, well, how, first of all, your feelings are not facts. So let's question what you're feeling, and let's be the prosecutor and let's be the defense. She is always prosecuting herself. That is normal. You all prosecute yourselves to some degree. And there is no defense. That's the problem. Why have you omitted defense? Could these assumptions be wrong? Again, it requires an assumption based on a core belief. Then everything cascades from there. So if we can question the assessment and work up to the core belief, this is where change can happen in the brain. So let's use an example. Anybody have an example that you want me to, of a friend or a family member of like a situation? So for example, something like, because I can do this for any situation. Trying to think of a client, maybe a client story. Oh, I can use the automatic thought of the girl that was molested, that there was something that she negative about her that would make her the target and not her other sister. There was something about her that made her the target of being molested. What if that's wrong, right? Again, this is why it was so impactful for me to say to her, it had nothing to do with you. Because in reality, she as an adult could see that. Like this had everything to do with the history of her grandfather, everything, right? So that, just that moment of questioning, what does this have to do with you? Is it actually true? Are you guilty or not? Okay. Hey. Is it true? Your first response is going to be yes. Because that's what's natural, that's what you've assumed. So the next question would be, well, is it absolutely true? Chances are, your probability wise, whatever assumption you're making about yourself, like, let's just say you're on Tinder and someone ghosts you. How many of you experienced that? I haven't, I actually haven't, but no one wants to admit that. That someone reached out to you and then just stopped. Or went on a date with you and then was like, not gonna work out, see you, bye. Okay. There's something wrong with me. So in response, there must be something wrong with me that would make me worthy of exclusion or worthy of abandonment, or I must be ugly. Let's use that one. I'm not pretty enough. I'm not good looking enough. I'm not tall enough. I'm not manly enough. I don't drive the right car. I don't care. Okay. Well, is it true? Well, yeah. Okay. Well, is it really absolutely, you're 100% factually know this to be a fact, that that's why they don't want to be with you? Well, no. Just that alone can open the door for you to think differently. How does this assumption of truth make you feel? It makes me feel like I want to hide, like I will never date again, like I'm going to be alone, I'm scared to go on another date, right? You can see that would really exacerbate the feelings. What would things be like if you didn't believe that? Well, if I don't believe that I'm ugly, then I would go back out there and date again. You see how that changes? That's just a little example that I used because none of you want to admit it. Okay, so the other thing is, what can't you handle? So some of this is obvious. So go to what you think you can't handle. Write them down and then go through this process. So the first thing would be decatastrophizing. So we have part of the assignment is the decatastrophizing. Well, you know what, let's look, let me go to. Let me go to this. Let's go to the homework. Okay, where are we at? Assignments, oh, we're already here, okay. Hold on a second, as those. Isn't this the one that I uploaded? Yeah, okay. So the first part of this assignment, so this is due next, not this coming Monday, the following Monday. So I wanted to give you over a week. So you got like a week and a half to really work on this. So you're going to first use the automatic thought record, and you're going to record. So this is here. You can, what I'd like you to do is you can print it up, you can handwrite it, download this PDF, print it up, okay? And what you're doing is so flip this horizontally. There we go. Date, time, situation. You're kind of trying to figure out what your cognitive distortions are, right? What is your assumption, right? What is the distortion? I'm going to fail. What's the all or nothing? What's the catastrophizing? What's the generalizing? Write it down. Time, situation, how it made you feel. So you're becoming the observer. That's the other thing. When you're stuck in it and it's just running you, you're just trying to flee and fight it. If you're actually observing it, like you want to actually understand it, it separates the criticism of it and you're more able to actually understand it better. So actually just monitoring it can make a huge impact. What feelings, your response, what response that you think would be better? And did this change? So another way of doing it is to, let me go back to this. What catastrophe am I worried about? I'm thinking we'll practice this on Monday when you come in. So you can go in here too. I don't know if I've actually posted this, so I'll post these. What is a catastrophe? What is something terrible? What would be the worst thing? Like my husband leaves me because I was a bitch this weekend. That would suck. I'd be upset. I'd have to, go through my shit, pack up my crap. I would have to deal with that, right? What do I think will happen? Well, what'll happen is I'll end up being homeless, or you kind of go with all of those fear thoughts and write it down. So if that happens, what's the probability of that happening, right? That my husband, there's probably a slight possibility. But is it really something I should be afraid of? I don't know, right? So again, what's the probability? Rate it from 9 to 10, 9 out of 10. How awful would this be if this happened, this worst thing, this catastrophe? Okay, let's use grades. Okay, we're using grades, this is an easy one. I'm worried that I'm gonna fail this one class. Rate it, 1 out of 10. If you fail the class, you're not gonna graduate in time. That would freaking suck, right? 9 out of 10, 8 out of 10 if you have to go another semester. Pretty big deal, right? If I don't pass, I'm gonna have to stay here another year. I'm gonna have to pay for more tuition, all the costs. What's the probability this is gonna happen? Well, it could be pretty high if you're not putting in the effort, or maybe you're not can't handle the level of the class demands when you add everything else that you're getting demanded. How awful would it be if I didn't graduate? Because that's your fear. Would be terrible. Worst case scenario, horrible. Best case scenario, well, I wouldn't graduate, but I would take another year. I'd probably save my money because I won't have to go to school full time. Right? So you see how you're working through all of the scenarios? What would a friend say to me? What would someone else say to me? So again, looking at it from the outside perspective, you're fine. How many people graduate in 5-6 years? Most people. Most people don't graduate in 4 years unless you came to college with like 30 plus credits. So the probability of graduating in 4 years is ideal. That's an ideal. That is like if nothing bad happens to you, if nothing challenging happens. So, okay. Would it really be that terrible? Probably not. Many people do it. How would you cope? I'd cry. I'd accept it because what can you do, right? What could help me get through it? I don't know. Crying. What positive reassuring thing would you say to reduce the catastrophe? This doesn't mean that you're never going to graduate. You're not the worst person on the planet. You still are a good person. You still have good character. So what? So that's an example. And then you re-rate it. So going back to this, you're going to fill this out for a week. And you might need multiple. And you want to hone in on what you specifically struggle with. The next thing you're going to do is use the decatastrophizing worksheet that I just went over with you. That's what this is. Here it is. Bam, 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 bam. We just went through this. So you're to find at least 2 areas of struggle. And if you don't have to, find a friend who's struggling. Walk them through this. Ask them if they can share their issue. Okay. 2, and then you're to decatastrophize that situation. Does that make sense? I'm not asking for perfection. I just want you to try. Put effort into this. Okay. Have a good weekend. I'll see you guys on Monday.